Good afternoon, Leo. Thanks for coming on to Radio Italia Uno. Again, we've already had a chat in the past.
Yeah, nice to be here.
So, Leo, let's remind the listeners the context for talking to you. You are, as someone who eventually when they'll see this video, a young broadcaster, online broadcaster. And actually, just tell us how young you are, how old you are, and the history of your broadcasting.
Yeah, so I'm 17 years old. I turned 17 last month and in year 11 currently. But I founded Six News Australia when I was 11 years old. That was in 2019 in year six in primary school. And from there, Six News has grown to be a 24/7 streaming news channel that's a national channel with a small team of other young journalists. And that will, I should say, turn 6 years old in March next year.
Wow, you started in year six at 11. I thought you'd started at 13. So well done. Congratulations
Thank you.
for sticking it out and gradually improving. And for your parents for support. I'm presuming they've supported you or haven't got in the way and given you some space to set things up in the house.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't have been doing this without my parents. You know, there are conspiracies that they're controlling everything and they're doing the editorial. They're not, but they've been supportive this entire time. The most they've really helped out with is maybe driving me to a story or setting up a light or something. But they've always been fully supportive and can't thank them enough. And also credit to the other young journalists we have here as part of the small team because we wouldn't be able to be a 24/7 operation without them.
And entirely coincidentally, on Twitter or X, I follow a Riccardo Puglisi in Italy. He's an economics professor, I think in Siena, but his family originated from Sicily, in Catania. Is that where your family comes from?
Yeah, so it's a generational thing. I think I follow him on Twitter as well. We're mutuals. Yes, so it's definitely it's down in the south. It's in Sicily. I'm sure my nonna would be able to have a lot more information on the family history, but it's
Yes,
around there absolutely. And
but
he's been here for well, in terms of Puglisi's in this country, been here for a few more than a few decades now.
yes, I recall. In fact, it was one of the small islands, maybe one of the Aeolian Islands, Libriums.
Mm.
So now, we've talked about your online broadcasting, and the context for bringing you back onto the radio is to talk about this legislation that's just been approved by the Australian Parliament on regulating social media access to teenagers. Because, by the way, right at the same time, the Italian political system is debating very much the same issue. So, what are your thoughts? What's your perspective on this?
Yes, I've been against this ban from the moment
Mm.
I first heard it proposed, for a multitude of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. But to keep it pretty simple, number one, I don't think it'll work, and it's going to be incredibly impossible to enforce. It doesn't account for vulnerable kids who use social media for really important reasons. It will be taken away from them. There's no parental exemptions under this legislation. We don't exactly know what platforms are going to be included. Sure, the government said YouTube won't be banned, but only a few days ago, YouTube actually came out and spoke to publishers, and they've said this legislation could still impact them. And look, on top of that, I think it's been incredibly rushed, and we haven't had enough consultation with the people it affects most, which are young people. And so I've been against it the entire time. I think I'm really concerned, especially in the past few weeks, how fast it went through a parliament, 24 hours only for public submissions, about a 3 hour inquiry, and quite literally the very last day of the Senate is when they got it through. I think it's a real concern for such significant legislation to be pushing it that far, that fast, I should say.
That fast, also that far. There could have been
Mm.
more discussion and reflection. What was interesting, well, several things are interesting about it, and we can unpack everything you've just said. It's passed with the both major parties approving it, and the crossbenchers kind of being ambivalent, kind of supporting the principle maybe, but not sure about the implementation. And I have to say, I heard, I think Monique Ryan saying that she's actually changed her mind drastically on this one. What's your feel of about the politics of this, quite apart from the policy?
Yeah, you make a few good points there. I think it was also Andrew Wilkie, who I think he had a letter in the Guardian as well, and he was saying, he changed his mind on this. And yeah, as you say, Monique Ryan voted against it. She mentioned 6 News in Parliament while talking about it. It has been interesting. Yes, there was a minority of the House crossbench that supported it, and they were just some independents. But a majority of the House crossbench did vote against it. That includes, Bob Katter, Dilay, Rebecca Sharkey, Bridget Archer also crossed the floor as a Liberal MP. And then in the Senate, it was the entire Senate crossbench that went fully against this. So from people like Cami Terrell, Jackie Lambie, the Greens, One Nation, the UAP, pretty much everyone, Fatima Payman, and also 2 coalition senators were against, 1 abstained. So it is interesting. I think the moment the coalition said they supported it, it was pretty obvious what the outcome would be, and that is it would pass. But in the final week or two of the parliament, it was interesting seeing a lot of more open concerns from coalition members, some who did end up voting for it, and some, as we mentioned, with Antic and Canavan and Archer, who did vote against it. And I think that really is interesting because there's a lot of talk about there being bipartisan support for this, but there is quite clearly widespread bipartisan opposition as well.
Yes. Okay, let's start to unpack your issues. So one reason given for this legislation, this approach, is to help to protect vulnerable people. Yet you mentioned that having access to these technologies or these media can help a lot of vulnerable young people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few examples there. For instance, we both know, right? This is a country that has a lot of remote areas, and there are teenagers in remote areas who are able to connect with their friends in cities through social media. For instance, one of the 6 News team, who's actually 15 years old, Maggie Perry, she's our election reporter, and she lives in remote Queensland. She's in Billawheeler, and she's able to connect with a lot of community regarding journalism and politics and elections through social media. And then on top of that, not just remote areas, there are kids who have maybe a tough school life and or tough home life, and they use social media as an escape because they can find a community on there. They're able to feel safer on there, and it might get them through tough times. And also speaking to a lot of young people around my age who went through the COVID lockdowns here in Melbourne, right? Yeah. 2 years of being stuck at home. They mentioned it would have been incredibly tough as 12, 13, 14-year-olds getting through that without having some access to social media. All of that's going to be taken away under this ban, and I really feel that there's been no consideration of that, which is a real concern. Suicide Prevention Australia was calling on lawmakers to reconsider this legislation, but that seems to have been ignored.
Yes, so the people proposing this approach talk about, amongst other things, how social media online interaction is a substitute for real, deep, personal, face-to-face relationships. But what you're saying is that there is a good and a strong complementarity. They can go together, they can enhance, and they can make up for the lack of this direct personal interaction. The lockdowns is a very good one, good example that might play out. So, in fact, there are lots of vulnerable people who get help from the social media, and in fact, your people, your helper, your colleague from Billawheeler, that town has been a significant town also in the news in recent years because of the Fiji's there. Okay, so there's that issue about actually helping social media, helping people who are in vulnerable situations. But what about the fact that it can be, or it is, a positive environment? And you've shown us that you've done extremely well and have thrived using these new technologies.
Yeah, and look, I think everyone recognizes, and I do absolutely, that obviously no one's going to have 100% positive experiences online, regardless of your age. It's just not possible. And so I think, again, that has to be taken into account, that there are positive experiences online. For many people, majority and overwhelmingly positive. And again, that is just being taken away with no consideration. Any parent, by the way, who's happy for their 15-year-old to have an Instagram account, that's not allowed either, because there are no parental exemptions under this legislation. And so, look, it's really important. And again, this was another point that Suicide Prevention Australia raised, that you can have positive experiences online, and we can make online space safer for young people without just stripping it away entirely. And I was asked about this in a few other media as well. And I think, this ban does risk stifling creativity. And look, I appreciate I am not every teenager, right? Majority of them don't care about going into journalism as a career. But as a broader point, there are teenagers who want to express themselves, who want to promote their passion, who want to do all of that at the age of 15 or 14. And they can do that. And sorry, I should say they should be able to do that safely online. But again, this is taken away from it. I think it shows a real kind of lack of understanding from lawmakers potentially about how important social media is in daily lives for young people, whether we like it or not.
And it's interesting. I'll recount an experience I had a few years ago. I visited China as part of an exchange of innovation scholars. And as you know, in China, access to things like Facebook, whatever, is severely contained by the government. Yet then whenever we met young students, they showed us ways to get around it. They showed us how to access VPNs and things like that. So you did mention that it's going to be very difficult to enforce and police this system. What do you think are the issues there?
Yeah, well, you mentioned VPNs, which is a great segue. The government has made various comments about somehow they'll stop VPNs, or VPNs would social media platforms would be expected to check that someone's in the country that they're saying they're in with the VPN. Again, that I think shows the lack of understanding about social media. Look, VPNs would be used to get around this, but also the government has said there's not going to be ID used, which, look, I welcome. I think there'd be a multitude of problems if you have some form of digital ID with these overseas social media platforms. The question is then, how could it be enforced? Is it just going to be check a box to say you're over a certain age? And if it's something else like facial recognition, I think, again, that's a concern, because facial recognition is far from perfect. It can't tell the moment you turn 16, the moment your birthday is. It can definitely misrepresent ages. There are a lot of people in their 20s who might look baby-faced, and there are a lot of people who are age 14 who might pass for 18, right? It's just not foolproof. And then it's essentially just restricting them for no reason at a certain point. So I think there'd be a lot of difficult enforcement options here, which is why you shouldn't rush this kind of process. You need to have a step back and think about how it works. You can't just say, okay, we're going to consult over the next 12 months. You've passed the legislation. That consultation and that figuring out should have been done a bit more before you actually went and made it law. But apparently that's not what's happened here.
Yes. I noticed you made a formal submission to, I can't remember exactly who you addressed it to, but apart from that, did any politicians or policymakers reach out to you to get your opinion proactively?
Yeah, well, that public submission was made to the inquiry that was looking at the legislation. As I mentioned before, right, it was only open for 24 hours. I was really rushing to get it in, but it was published, and I appreciate that. Look, in terms of lawmakers, I was lucky enough to speak to a joint select committee about social media, and this was a few months back. And I was able to speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, articulating my points on a wide range of things, but the social media ban was at the center of it. And look, I was able to articulate points to a bipartisan committee. For what it's worth, that committee actually did not fully recommend a blanket social media ban for young people, but apparently that's ignored. But I was lucky enough to speak there, and look, certainly there have been lawmakers who have mentioned Six News and myself, and I appreciate that. I mentioned before, Monique Ryan mentioned us in Parliament. Matt Cavanagh has mentioned us in the media. David Limbrick in the Victorian State Parliament has mentioned us and spoken to the state or addressed questions to the state premier about that. So certainly there's been mentions of it, and I think it shows that a lot of people in power are looking to Six News and know Six News and focus on Six News, and that's really key. There was also a town hall with Monique Ryan, who is also my local member for what it's worth, and Zoe Daniel, where I was able to speak to that as well to a public audience, and I appreciated that opportunity. So there's been some options, absolutely, but I think broadly, not just forgetting myself, there has not been enough consultation with young people.
Okay, that's interesting. So they're both very articulate people, Monique Ryan and Zoe Daniels, an ex-journalist herself. It's just generally let this change a little bit. I hope and I can imagine that what you've managed to do can act as a role model or some level of inspiration for teenagers who are interested in media studies or journalism across the country. I was saying off air earlier that my father was a tailor, would be very happy to see you dressed in that suit and the tie, looking really smart. I can let me make a couple of other comments since we last spoke, which might have been before the lockdowns. I think your voice has changed. You feel obviously you've grown. You're 3 or 4 years older. Even the cadence of how you talk has, let me say, matured, but it's changed, and it's clear already. When we did speak the other time, you're very articulate, and you put your approaches and your arguments across very clearly. And I like following your tweets. Keep on using the word on calling it Twitter online, and occasionally watching the live broadcast. Now, which platforms do you find interesting? You've mentioned YouTube as being apparently outside or maybe inside of this new ban, because you do broadcast live on YouTube, but also on Patreon.
Yeah, so look, Patreon is
Patreon.
excluded here as our medium for donations. You know, we're 95%, I would say, viewer funded, just $4 a month on patreon.com/6newsau. But look, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, we have significant audiences. Twitter especially. Facebook's more of our older audiences. Instagram and TikTok tend to be our younger followers. For obvious reasons, that just tends to be the platform ages. Twitter and YouTube are pretty mixed, as you mentioned. And look, I mean, I think everyone agrees, right? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok count as social media here, and they will be included. Again, I don't think the ban should go ahead at all. So in reality, I don't think anything should be included. But it has been interesting seeing the kind of back and forth. As I mentioned, right, YouTube was initially included. Now they're saying no. Snapchat, they said it was going to be exempt because they were classifying it as messaging, and now they're going to include it. Discord, which is, yeah, sure, it's messaging, but it's got its own problems as an app. That is being excluded. Telegram's excluded. WhatsApp's excluded. I think it's a real concern that, a lot of people still aren't sure about this. It seems like something that people should be aware of. It seems maybe even the most key point of this: what platforms count as social media? And look, with a pretty broad definition, quite a few things could count as social media. And so I think that's a concern and something we might see develop over the next 12 months as this consultation period continues.
Yes, and I'm guessing that a lot of parents probably haven't focused yet on this, but when it starts to begin happening and their kids are either happy or unhappy that being excluded, it will come up as topics of conversation around the dinner table, or however people have their conversations around these things. Now, you mentioned you have colleagues across Australia. Where can you give us an update of what your reach is, your personal footprint?
Yeah, so look, we're always trying to expand and grow the team, but at the moment we've got a team of about 10 young people based around the country. We're looking to expand in SA for what it's worth. No one there yet, but we do cover it, obviously. A lot of our team is based in Queensland, never particularly targeted Queensland, but it just so happens to work out like that. There's a couple others here in Victoria. We have a North American correspondent who's in Toronto, actually. And we also have partners at WAMN News, which is another independent news channel there in Western Australia. And they're essentially our affiliate. So we don't have anyone personally on the ground there, but essentially they work with us. So it's a small team, but it's a continuously growing team, and I'm really happy with seeing how it's developed, because it's enabled us to cover a wide range of stories that wouldn't be possible if it's just me sitting at home doing interviews over Zoom the entire time. And so the team has been great, and in 2025 we're going to be expanding it even more, hopefully.
And the Peter in WA, is that also basically a teenager run setup?
No, they're adults, in fact. So they're
adults in.
Yeah, but they're our partners, and we do joint stuff with them all the time. They're a great small team as well. You can see their mics at press conferences, so they're out and about. But they're adults, which helps because they're able to go to press conferences while I'd normally be in school hours.
Actually, you said you're 17, so you'll be an adult soon. You'll we'll have to stop calling you teenager, and you'll join over to the dark side.
Well, I mean, look, 18, 19 is still a teenager technically, so I can keep milking it for a while. But you're right. I got 1 year of school left. I've been year 12, and I only have a couple subjects in year 12 anyway, which means a bit more free time on my hands. Obviously for study to some extent, but it also makes things easier with balancing out 6 years because I had quite a few subjects this year. And look, I think the balance was there, but it's not the easiest when you've got all these stories and all these elections while you're also trying to do, 5 different exams.
And are all your final exams out of the way for the year?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Long story short, while in year 11, I have done, and other year 11 students at my school have done some year 12 subjects.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for those results. We'll see. But thankfully for this year, it's all done and dusted. No more classes. I can just relax for the first time in quite some time. But then again, with all the news that's happening and all the amount of media that's speaking to us about the social media ban, yeah, I don't think I am on a break really.
And you've got an election, a federal election at least, due by May next year. So that will keep you busy, no doubt.
Mm. Yeah,
The
absolutely. We're,
Yep.
we're going to be full speed ahead with that election coverage. I'm really looking forward to it.
And what subjects? Let's stick on this. What subjects you're doing next year?
Yeah, well, it's only a couple. It's English and politics. So two,
Oh,
two, two. Yeah, the subjects I've always enjoyed doing, and it's been annoying because of small numbers, they haven't been able to run politics classes. But finally, next year we're able to do it, and I'm looking forward to that because might come as a shock, but I'm interested in politics.
oh, that's interesting. That's excellent because I know you've been doing some journalism subject as well, but and English and politics will be very useful also for at least for this career and whatever else you decide to follow up with. Well, well say thank you very much, Leonardo, for having come on again onto Radio Italia Una Adelaide. Congratulations for having come so far and for sticking through it. And as I say, I can tell that you're developing and maturing in the role, as anyone would. But obviously, you love it and you do an excellent job. You've got a good following, from what I can tell, on Twitter. And
Really appreciate
congratulations.
it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Anytime. Thank you.
And so have a Merry Christmas, and I will keep on following you and see what happens in the new year for the next elections.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas to you as well.